All right, so in a recent video, I made the announcement that I'm switching from the 35mm 1.8 by Sony to the Viltrox 35mm 1.8 EVO. And I had a lot of people ask me to compare both of these lenses, so we're gonna do that today. And we're gonna go over a couple main categories. We're gonna go over the image quality, so the sharpness and the chromatic aberration, because the Sony 35 has notoriously bad chromatic aberration, and the Viltrox is an APO apochromatic lens. So these lenses are basically the polar opposite in that regard. So I'm gonna compare these lenses in a couple different ways while I'm out here this morning. First, we're gonna do the image quality, then we're gonna do the autofocus, and then we'll compare the sizes of both of these lenses, because I had a couple people say that they think the Viltrox EVO is a little bit too big, but I don't think that's the case. Now, let me just make it clear that this is not going to be a super technical comparison. I'm not gonna take photos with both of these lenses of a chart and a grid and compare the Loca, the sharpness, the distortion on that. I'm just gonna be doing some in the field, real world testing with both of these lenses. All right, my side quest in this video is to finally get a decent photo of this building. If you saw my video about the TT Artisan 40mm f2 lens, then you will know that every photo I took at this spot was insanely out of focus, but I don't think that will be an issue today. All right, so this scene right now is pretty much the perfect example of showing the weaknesses of the Sony 35 1.8. We have power lines and we have a little bit of harsh light reflecting off of the side of this building. Two things that do not bode well for the Sony. All right, so basically what I'm gonna be doing is just mounting the camera on a tripod and taking the exact same photo with both lenses. Am I the only person that still uses an L bracket even when they're using a tripod with a ball head? I think ball heads are great for leveling your frame, but when it comes to switching between vertical and horizontal photos, I think an L bracket is still just the way to go. All right, there's been a bunch of people crossing the street, but I think we've got a minute now. The first lens we're gonna do is the Viltrox EVO. I'm gonna take a couple different exposures, one at f1.8, one at f2.8, and then another at f4. All right, and now f1.8 with the Sony. All right, this is actually my first time comparing images shot from each of these lenses, and the difference is even more dramatic than I actually expected. Here we have the Viltrox, and as you can see, there is no color fringing, no chromatic aberration anywhere to be seen along here. If we go to the Sony, you can see just how different that is. These are both shot at f1.8. They are both 1/2000th of a second, and you can see the power lines are basically just like purple at this point, and you've lost pretty much all of the detail and the panels here along this glass because it just becomes lost in the lack of sharpness and the color fringing here. It's even worse than I expected, and if we zoom out, you can actually see just how different the files look from each of these lenses. The Sony has a lot more distortion. I think the Viltrox, from this frame, it kind of looks like it has a little bit more vignetting, but we'll see about that when it comes to the other photos. But for now, I think the Viltrox is definitely gonna be the portfolio-worthy shot. All right, so this is the next location we're gonna be doing. These pillars are gonna be perfect for showing off the distortion and comparing and seeing how they do in terms of the vertical lines. And then also just the sharpness again in general. All right, so I'm gonna shoot with the Viltrox first here again, once again at f1.8, stop down to f2.8, and f4. Now I'm gonna swap over to the Sony, f1.8, f2.8, and f4. Now the reason I'm stopping at f4 instead of going all the way to f8 is because f4 is pretty much where most of the chromatic aberration disappears on the Sony 35, and I think the jump in sharpness from f4 to f8 isn't really as noticeable as, you know, f1.8 to f2.8 to 2.8 to f4. All All right, and here we have the Viltrox shot at f1.8. I somehow managed to miss focus on this building here. As you can tell, it is focused right here. Don't know how I did that. It's either lens related or it's probably user error. I was using a lightweight carbon fiber tripod, which is not something I would recommend for photography, especially since I managed to misalign the frames here. As you can tell, the Sony is slightly off to the left a little bit, but it's okay. One of the first things I notice is that the distortion on this frame seems about the same, but the colors are definitely a bit warmer on the Viltrox. I think the colors look much better on the Viltrox here. And as you can see on the Sony, you can see a bit of the color fringing. Of course, that is quite far away, so it's not that big of a deal. But if we look at the Viltrox f4, compare that to the Sony at f4, and you can tell that the Viltrox has virtually all of its vignetting eliminated at f4, while the Sony still has quite a bit. That's the Sony at f1.8. This is the Sony at f4. And look at the colors here. This is unedited. This looks so nice. Compared to the Sony f4, the colors look so dull and boring. Now, of course, once you start editing, if you apply presets, I mean, does it really matter that much? But I mean, if you are a person who likes to shoot JPEG, then the Viltrox is gonna be 100% better in every single way. Not to mention the sharpness is insane. The Sony is quite sharp at f4 as well, but I mean, I just don't think it compares to the Viltrox. I mean, the contrast and the colors just look so much better here. And of course, the Viltrox is going to get the portfolio shot even at f1.8 and being slightly out of focus. It still just looks better. And this is gonna be the last frame we're gonna do. I'm gonna start off with the Sony with this one because I don't feel like swapping lenses, but this is also gonna be a great test in terms of the chromatic aberration and the color fringing here. So we're gonna do Sony. All right, so we're shooting at f1.8, 2.8, and f4. Swap to the Viltrox. All right, f1.8 on the Viltrox EVO. 2.8. And f4. All right, and this shot definitely shows the weaknesses of the Sony as well. This is the Sony 35 at 1.8, and you can see all of this color fringing right here. Hello, bird. But yeah, that is pretty bad. Also, quite a bit of vignetting compared to the Sony at 1.8. A bit more, but you know, also the clouds are a bit different, which could also be throwing it off. But the Sony, or the Viltrox at 1.8 compared to the Sony, I wish the bird was still there for the Viltrox one. But that is a big difference. So let's just show these again. All right, that is the Viltrox. That is the Sony. Now let's look at the Viltrox at f4 compared to 1.8. The difference in vignetting here with the Viltrox between 1.8 and f4 is massive. Here is the Sony at f4. A bit more vignetting. So Sony 1.8, Sony f4. I think when it comes to the distortion, they're basically the same on each lens. It kind of shows better on the Viltrox depending on the angle sometimes. But I'm gonna give it to the Viltrox when it comes to the distortion. But when it comes to the vignetting, it's not too far off, but I do think that because the Viltrox does better at f4 when it comes to the vignetting, I'm gonna give a point to the Viltrox there as well. And once again, the Viltrox gets the portfolio shot. All right, the one area I mentioned in my Viltrox video that the Sony clearly wins over the Viltrox, I feel like now looking back, I was maybe a little dramatic, and I was talking about the autofocus. Now this is with the Sony here, and I'll give you guys an idea of how fast the autofocus is. The main reason I loved this lens for so long is because the autofocus was just simply so reliable. It never missed, literally never. Now I am gonna do a little comparison. I know this isn't the best way to demonstrate it, but I'm gonna focus on something really close up and then something really far away, and we'll see how quick that is. So focus far away. And you can see just how fast that is. Now let's switch to the Viltrox and see. All right, now I have the Viltrox on, and we'll do basically the same test, also at f1.8. As you can see, the Viltrox is much slower compared to the Sony. Now that's not to say that the autofocus with this lens is slow in general. It's really just when you're going from focusing on those really close-up things to something like really far away. So even if I just back off to right here, focus on the tripod, you'll see if I then focus to that, it's much faster. But let's be realistic. How often are we going to be going from focusing on something super close up to something super far away? Not very often. All right, so where do we currently stand? The Viltrox wins when it comes down to the image quality and the sharpness and chromatic aberration, and the Sony wins when it comes down to the autofocus. But where else do these lenses actually tie? Now, in the comments of my previous video, I saw a lot of people mention that they think the Viltrox 35 EVO is way too big for at least the Sony a7C cameras. And I beg to differ, because if the size was never a problem with the Sony 35, then it will not be a problem with the Viltrox, because they are virtually almost the exact same size. The Viltrox is only slightly bigger. Now, this is a 58mm filter thread compared to the 55 on the Sony, but in terms of that, the Viltrox is ever so slightly wider. I'll put a better video or picture up on the screen comparing both of these lenses, and you will see that they are almost identical in terms of size. The Viltrox is slightly heavier, but at that point I can't even knock it because the build quality on this lens is just way better. Another factor when it comes to the size is that the Viltrox also has an aperture ring, which makes a really big difference, and that was the first thing that drew my attention to this lens compared to the Sony, because I've been begging Sony for years to make a updated 35 1.8 with an aperture ring, and it feels like with the Viltrox I got the exact lens that I wanted this whole time. The only way I could see this lens maybe being a problem for some people, especially if you have bigger fingers. I have long skinny fingers, so I don't really need to worry about it as much, but it depends on how much room you like to have between the grip and the actual lens itself. There is ever so slightly less with this lens compared to the Sony, but overall this lens does not feel larger than the Sony. Slightly heavier, but it's still balanced. When you do the tilt test, the lens does not fall forward if you have the small rig grip on. So I'm gonna have to give these lenses a tie when it comes to the size, but I'm also gonna have to give another point to the Viltrox because it does have an aperture ring. All right, so to no surprise, you guys already know that I replaced the Sony 35 with the Viltrox, so you shouldn't be surprised that the Viltrox is currently on my camera right now. But after doing this comparison, I think it really just comes down to two things. Do you prefer the image quality and the sharpness of the Viltrox, or do you prefer the autofocus of the Sony? And I forgot to even mention this earlier or demonstrate it earlier in the video, but the Sony does have a closer minimum focus distance compared to the Viltrox. I'm not sure exactly what the Sony versus the Viltrox is, so I will put that on the screen right now. Now, I do like to do the good old Lego test just to demonstrate just how close you can get with each lens. So I will go and show you guys that comparison up on the screen right now. So the Sony also clearly wins in that department, which I think plays a big factor into why the Viltrox was struggling so much with the autofocus out there, and as soon as I took a couple steps back, the Viltrox was almost equally as fast as the Sony. So in that way, it's also kind of a tie once you get beyond minimum focus distance to infinity. So with that, I will leave it up to you guys to make the decision because you guys already know what my decision is. If you have any questions about this, please let me know in the comments down below. If there's any other comparisons you would like to see me make, please let me know, and I could either make another video or I could just let you know, message me on Instagram, and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can with the details and the information that you are looking for. So thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe to help support the channel. If you want to help support the channel even further, you can become a member of the channel. Or if you like the way I edited the portfolio photos in this video, I do have Lightroom presets on my website that are currently available. Regardless, I hope I could inspire you guys to get out and take more photos. Go out and shoot.